The mystery of the Great Pyramids of Giza, you know, the famous ones in Egypt. There's a theory going round, and this is based on high-tech radar technology. They've taken kind of underground pictures using radar. And there's a theory now that the peaks, the pyramids that we see, may have been just the pinnacles of vast structures that plunged down into the earth more than 2 kilometers. And then in fact what you're seeing there is the tip of massive structures, columns, vast chambers, underground cities, where it is thought that the pyramids planned to retreat in the event of Armageddon. There is definite evidence that there are these huge chambers down there, 263 feet across. That's pretty damn big. These huge vertical columns that go down so far that, if it's true, they go down, they say that these columns may plunge to a depth of 2,125 feet. And that if you add that to the peak of the pyramid, the total height of that structure would be 2,835 feet, which would make it the tallest building ever constructed, taller now than the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world in Dubai, which is 2,717 feet. So it's possible that 2,500 years before the birth of Christ, they built the tallest structure ever made, and that there are underground cities underneath the pyramids. I, for one, find that rather intriguing. Let's talk to our favourite historian, Ashley Hern. Hello, Ashley. Please don't knock this down. Say it's possible.
My role is sort of the representative of the order of the wet blanket, really, aren't I? So come on and sort of say. Yeah. Well, I suppose, in their defence, that they are sort of adopting new technology to an old problem. It's very easy for scholars to get these sort of paradigms of thought where you accept sort of the conventional wisdom, and then you sort of tend to be resistant to any challenges to that. And certainly over the last 10, 15 years, lots of discoveries have, further back really, have been under sort of reversed what we used to think about how human societies have changed over time. So there used to be the view that you'd have the very simple hunter-gatherer societies, then they adopted farming, then they adopted cities, and essentially you couldn't really do anything too complicated in terms of massive building structures until you developed quite large centres of population. And a lot of that has been proved to be untrue. I mean, those famous discoveries of the famous site of Göbekli Tepe, which is this large structure of megaliths which date to about 10,000 BC. So a long basic way of saying, well, why not? The trouble is, again, it's the evidence that's used for this. I mean, it's these engineers who are sort of using this new technology, synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography, and they've been using it quite extensively. So they've been using it to look at the three great pyramids. They basically did some research at the Khufu pyramid, and then they've been looking at the central pyramid where they found all these. They claim to have found all these structures underneath. Now, pyramids elsewhere in the world do have underground structures which have been excavated and are being excavated. The most famous example, I mean, the Daily Mail article, there's a chap from Denver who mentions this. This is what, when I saw the story, immediately sort of struck me. So there's a famous city called Teotihuacan.
I've been there. I've been there.
Fantastic. I mean, three massive great pyramids there. Pyramid of the Moon, Pyramid of the Sun, Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. And under each of them, you have these quite extensive caverns. And again, over the last 5 years, they found more and more of these. So we shouldn't necessarily assume, well, how could they possibly have constructed these, given that they lived in these sort of very relatively straightforward, simple societies? They wouldn't have the technology. Even the building of the pyramids themselves is a remarkable achievement. We only see the inside, really. And the fact that the limestones on the outside were sort of so carefully engineered to fit together. But as always, if you look at the pictures, I mean, I can sort of see where they're coming from. There's clearly something underneath there, but to elaborate that into this idea of very precise measurements in terms of the depth of it, To call the word city, and what do we mean by a city? City.
I think city is it's not a tube system underneath a city, but it says, as I say, it's got these huge 8 enormous vertical columns that they say plunge to an extraordinary depth of 2,125 feet. Which is a couple of kilometres, and that they plunge into colossal cubic chambers that are 263 feet across. The one thing I would say about this, Ashley, is this. Now, notwithstanding that we're talking about allegedly, they even say there might have been stairs going round these huge columns and things like that. But if for example, the city of Venice, if you go underneath, it is built on huge sort of stilt wooden columns that are then put onto sort of planks of wood on the base of the ocean to make sure that the city doesn't sink. So arguably these vertical columns underneath the pyramids may have been put there to make sure the pyramids don't sink beneath the sand.
I mean, that's my instinct, is if you're looking at something like foundations, you don't necessarily have to explain it by sort of, again, we're back like we were a few weeks ago. We were talking about buried treasure and all the other things that attract interest.
I always come on to you with all these sort of these layman's fantasy stories.
I mean, it's very Indiana Jones. I mean, again, they've used this sort of Egyptian text to come up with this date of 38,000 years ago. It's pretty tendentious, that. I mean, there's a famous text which dates the earliest rulers of Mesopotamia, and they're claiming they lived for 60,000 years. So if you're going to use that system, you go right. There's no this goes back to the old idea, and you may have heard this before. This is an idea put forward by people like Graham Hancock, who has a whole series on Netflix, that there used to be this ancient world civilization that disappeared at the end of the Ice Age, and the rising sea levels essentially destroys it, and a lot of what exists subsequently is a reflection of this ancient society.
Well, let me tell you, Ashley, that ancient civilization definitely existed, because it's confirmed 57 times a day on Facebook. But here's the thing, though. The Sphinx, the other part of this big theory, that perhaps we don't know, or the mystery of the pyramids and the Sphinx has yet to be explained. This same people who come up with the theory of the underground city say that the Sphinx may be like 10,000 years old, much older than we think, because they say that the marks on the stone, the sandstone, could only have been formed by torrential rain, and there hasn't been torrential rain in Egypt for 10,000 years.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is quite an old idea. This has been around since the 80s and 90s, I mean, even earlier than that. The famous theory was that it dates to 10,500 BC. Have you heard the theory, which is to do with the Orion constellation? No. The idea that the Giza pyramids are aligned with the way that Orion would look, but from 10,000
years ago.
The trouble is that was based on, you have to do two things. One, you have to turn the pyramids upside down and look at them from north to south. Right. And secondly, the angle is 38 degrees, but actually, if you look at the angle of Orion, it looked 10,000 years ago. This is due to a process called precession, which sees the stars move around. That is, it's about 8 degrees of angle out.
Right.
So a lot of these theories are really exciting. They're really interesting. We are right to sort of not sort of reject them out of hand, but as I say to my students, you have to have the positive evidence. All of the excavations about the Sphinx have only produced evidence from the 3rd millennium, at the time of when the pyramids are constructed, all the pottery, all the clay from round about it. So they may be right, but there's no positive evidence. We'll have to see when they publish their papers, because again, it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. Right. They've made a big fuss about it, which has got lots of attention.
It's fascinating stuff. Now, listen, you've got 30 seconds. What do you think the pyramids were or are, and what was the Sphinx?
I see no evidence not to say that they are essentially tombs, but they are right. People are right to say they may have had multiple purposes. I tend to reject some of the fringe theories. Ben Carson's famous theory that they were built to store the grain for Joseph and the story from the Bible.
Right.
The Sphinx, as far as I'm concerned, all the evidence suggests that it's contemporary and was built to put the face of one of the kings whose pyramid was there. It was later reshaped by a later pharaoh and reused there. So it's really interesting. As always with these theories, I look forward to them providing more evidence, and that we can, if we can, everyone wants to reverse these uncommon.
Well, listen, Ashley, you know I don't need any evidence to get you on, so it's brilliant to talk to you. Really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. That's Ashley Hern, our favourite historian. Great stuff, that, isn't it?